Welcome again, everybody. So, for our final story of the day, it is about planning for scale. And I'm happy to introduce John, whose favorite comic book is Black Panther. And just like Wakanda, there is more here than meets the eye at first. Enjoy the last story of the day. Please welcome John on stage.
First off, thank you, Peter, Wakanda forever. And hello and good evening, everyone. My name is John Paz, and yes, I'm aware that I am the only thing standing between you and happy hour. So I'm going to try not to linger too much. So let's get started. So just first a little bit about me to let you know I'm legit. I currently am a senior content designer for Atlassian. Some people call us technical writers. I also used to be an Atlassian administrator in a previous life. And I like to think that that experience has brought me a lot of empathy that I bring to the product teams at Atlassian every day. And even before that, before I was an administrator, I was a long-time Atlassian fanboy. And you can say that I was a drinker of the Kool-Aid, so to speak. Now, I wasn't sure if that analogy would go over well with a largely European audience, but if we're all familiar with what Kool-Aid is, I won't explain too much further. But drinking of the Kool-Aid, yes, I'm a fanboy. I love Atlassian products, and I bring that passion every single day. But in the spirit of my favorite Atlassian value, I want to be transparent about what my talk is actually about, because there's some potential for confusion. So on the agenda, it says planning your apps for real-world scale. I like that. It sounds impressive, but it looked better on the slide, but I took the word apps out. So it's planning for real-world scale. And it's strategic. It's not just for aesthetics. I felt like the advice that I'm giving is not just for vendors. It can be applicable to anyone who wants to plan for growth. And these are things that I think you can use in your day-to-day life with or without building things that are very, very large. But again, just so you're aware, you are firmly in the code and beyond track. And so this is very much the beyond part. So if you're looking for guidance on load balancers, or if you're looking for guidance on how many nodes your Jira data center instance should have, you might be at the wrong talk. You're at the right place, but you're not at the right talk, at least not for what you think it's about. Now, you'll forgive me for my clickbaity title, but last year when I submitted this talk with this title, it didn't get accepted. So when I changed it and used the word scale, it seemed that things were much more interesting for people. But really, scaling is an important thing to think about when you're thinking about growth and how to do better business or how to get more revenue. But I think what's really important for Atlassian ecosystem, for partners and even Atlassian employees, is to keep in mind that scale is about knowing your users as well. And I don't think you should think about scale just in terms of size. Oh, wrong, almost there. So my talk is definitely about scale. It's not the type of scale that you're probably thinking about. Now, I'm a technical writer, content designer. So words are kind of my thing, and I like to take some liberty with them. So I think that you might be thinking about the wrong kind of scale. That it's less about the size of things that I'm more concerned about, and more about putting them on a spectrum, understanding all of your users, all of the experiences that go into the experiences of using your application, of using your add-on, or if you're giving services. I think there's a lot to be said. So again, just the two different types of scale. I use the word scale here interchangeably, so if you get confused with sizing, just remember that the real world scale is that what I'm talking about is a noun. It's a thing you can build. It's something that you can use to measure your empathy for your customers or for whoever you're providing services to. But it's not the scaling type of, again, numbers or size or weight. So when you see slides like this is where I hope that people would be interested enough to tweet it. And if you do, my Twitter handle is appropriately down there, and I'd love it if you did. It makes me feel real good. But I think it's important that you identify and measure what your actual users do. Actual users is an important distinction, because it's not just your target users. It's the people who are actually using your products. Whether they're right or not, I don't think is as important as just understanding what you do know and what you don't know about your users. So what I'm suggesting is not necessarily, I mean, we all want to measure what people do with our stuff. It's important that we have analytics. It's important that we're capturing user feedback with surveys and all those things. That's great. But are you measuring your empathy for your users? So there's lots of really small vendors and lots of small software developers who don't have the time or the resources to have really extensive user experience teams like Atlassian does, or to carry out really involved, long-running research projects to figure out exactly what users want and need. That's a luxury that not everyone has. But I think it's more important to understand how much empathy you have. So if you know that you have gaps, that's important. It's important that you keep track of them and that you bring them up in planning on a regular basis. Lucy talked about sparring earlier, and this is one of those instances where if your favorite edge case gets ignored on a regular basis, you should always talk about it in sparring. You should always bring it up. It's important to you. It's important to the people who use your products. So just because it doesn't make as much money as another part of your company doesn't mean that you should forget it or that it's still not important. Bring it up and bring it often. So I'm not sure if I said the word yet, but it's a little trigger word that I've been using when I discuss my talk with people. Because as you can imagine, the way I talk about this and just the topic of what I'm discussing can be a little controversial, and I'm okay if I haven't won everyone over to that. What I'm discussing is actually the most important thing you're going to listen to about today. But I guarantee you that there are some instances of everyone in this room who've done what I just described. And it's got a really specific name, and I'm almost sure that you probably have heard it in your head if I haven't already said it out loud. But do you care about the edge cases, the people who use your product? Are you sure? Because I'm almost certain that we've all made that compromise. Because you can't please everyone. You can't give everyone everything. So sometimes you have to make the hard decision. So if you haven't had an edge case that you had to ignore, let's talk about it afterwards, because I want to know your secret to success. But where do edge cases come from? Are they just people that we don't care about? Do they not give us money? Are they free users? Can we afford to ignore them? I don't think so. But you've all done that closed won't fix resolution status on Jira, and we know that it's a tough call. But what does it usually look like? It's usually a legacy customer who's got an old version they refuse to get off of. So they're using an unsupported version, but thousands of users are using it every day without a problem. I think we all know why that's a problem, even if they don't have a problem, but it's still an edge case that they've paid you at some point and you want to provide a good experience for them, if only just to move them onto something more current. All I'm suggesting in this talk, and it's the underlying message, is that edge case shouldn't be a dirty word. And even more importantly, to the Atlassian ecosystem, it's absolutely crucial to the business model. Atlassian tools are extremely versatile. I don't think I need to convince anybody of that. It's our biggest selling point and also our biggest pain point at the same time. You can do pretty much anything with Atlassian products, and some things you probably shouldn't do with Atlassian products. But part of what I wanted to do in this talk, there's 3 different sections here, and I'm going to try to convince you that it's important enough to care about the edge cases. And I'll start by telling a story that I found was not actually typical of Atlassian use cases, but this person actually is pushing it to the extreme, and it's by design. So I won't just jump straight into it. This is Rachel Wright, and she's a Confluence and Jira administrator. She works as an enterprise service partner, if I'm not mistaken. And the interesting thing about Rachel is that she works from the road. While all of us probably work from home at some point, or at least you've heard of the concept, Rachel pushes that to the extreme in that she works completely from the road, from a truck, from a mobile vehicle, recreational vehicle, if you're familiar with the term. And it's the real deal. So she doesn't just run her admin business from the road. She also tracks all the maintenance that needs to be done. She tracks the places where she goes, the gas that she needs to collect, all with Jira and Confluence. And so I posted kind of a call to action on community probably about 3 months ago, looking for weird and interesting stories for inspiration for this talk. And Rachel, she had this preloaded because a part of her sales pitch is that she can pretty much do anything with these tools, and I believe her. She's got 3 or 4 part series that describes in great detail about how she pulls this off, and I would encourage you all to figure it out or to go have a look at it because it's an impressive story. But so just to up the stakes a little bit, what Rachel does is a thing called boondocking. Has anybody heard of this term before? Because there was some pushback when I rehearsed it. Oh, no one. Fantastic. I get to teach you something new. So even if you learn nothing else from my talk, I can teach you about this. So boondocking is actually camping, but without the stuff that makes camping easy. So it's camping completely on solar, without hookups, without your own water. So you have to get rid of your own waste. You have to do everything all on your own. And again, remember, Rachel's doing this all with Jira and Confluence. Jira and Confluence gave her the confidence to do this. And she does it on every, this is how she makes her money. She walks the walk. So as you can imagine, her sales pitch to her customers is pretty rock solid. This begs to ask the question, what are your users actually doing with the stuff that you didn't plan to? Again, you don't have to code things to enable them to do this. They're already doing it. I think that's a testament to how great these products are engineered. But you should be asking yourself the question, are there other weird use cases that I'm not thinking about? Or is there maybe an opportunity here to sell more products or to target a different demographic? What is Rachel doing that we could leverage and help inform our planning later? These are just important questions that you should be asking in your planning meetings or in sparring or in any kind of discussion where you want to figure out what's the next step. When you're doing a good job and you want to figure out how to do better, these are the kind of really difficult questions that you should be asking. I scheduled in a couple seconds of silence for impact. So if your users are doing it wrong, but they still pay you, are they actually wrong? I don't think so. And that most companies like revenue, I would think that no one would say no to that. That especially if they're not causing a disruption to anything, if it's not some tenant problem that you can't be avoided, let them do whatever they want with our wonderful, interesting, and versatile products. The most important thing is that you're getting what you need to from them, and that's just incentive to keep on going, that you're doing a good job. That's in the form of revenue and sales. So if anything that you've gone over is surprising, or if you are aware of your deficiencies and how well you understand your target demographic, we call it empathy debt. And it's an actual thing, and Atlassian has lots of interesting ways that we go around this. But I think we're really good at Atlassian at identifying when we have these blind spots. And we don't always have the incentive to do something about it, but it doesn't mean that it's not important. And it's actually more important to understand that when we're making a decision in a space where we don't have enough information, that we at least call it out, that we're not making a decision with as much confidence as we'd like. So we call it empathy debt. And I'll go over some strategies a little bit later about what do you actually do about that. The next reason why edge cases, I think, are really important is just because of the nature of Atlassian products. Think about how you probably were first introduced to Atlassian. It's almost certain that it was somebody who brought it to you in your organization. That it's very organic. Say, oh, I found this Jira thing. It can totally do exactly what we've been trying to do with Excel for like 3 years. Let's just make a pitch and try to sell it to our boss. Or you found out that another department has been using Confluence for 3 years already, and you had no idea, and you've been begging your boss for Confluence. It's this kind of rapid, organic adoption that actually tends to cause problems in our ecosystem. So from the fresh vanilla install to the latest version to your old tired instance that's dependent on your poorly supported apps, it's not important on how it gets in there. What's more important is that people use it and they find it useful, and they want to share it. They want to share it with their friends. They want to share it with their colleagues. Now, you can think about how we get into to people's companies. And again, I'm probably a little bit biased about how I think it happens. But it's the same story over and over again. Usually it starts with one of our free products, the land model, or it's free. Why would you not want to try it? So we all know that the magic to Atlassian, that everything that Atlassian's built on is run by free private repos and Bitbucket, because I work for Bitbucket, and I think that's important to shout out. My animation went a little close, a little further than I went to. That's all right. We'll let it happen again just for dramatic effects, and because I can't fast forward it. So again, organic adoption starts in a single department. We've all been there, where the IT department usually leads the way with Jira software and a company credit card. But pretty soon, it's finance. And then finance has got their friends on board in services. And the next thing you know, from services, it's support. And pretty soon, it becomes a nightmare for anybody who wants to do any kind of real reporting, for anybody who wants to export things or consolidate or aggregate. This is a really common problem, so much so that there's an entire ecosystem of people who help support our customers to solve these problems. It's a very, very common scenario. But I'm not sure that as an ecosystem we're doing a great job in planning for it or in trying to give them what they need to do their job, but just a little bit easier. And that's part of the reason is that as an isolated team, I think we all know what to expect from behavior here. That we know that they're going to want to use Jira and Confluence together, and they want to link these two. But when you start linking other instances with custom fields, and you start learning different instances, cloud versus server, and you have different budgets that are being paid for, I mean, it becomes a nightmare. Man, that looks easy, doesn't it? I wish it was that easy in real life. And with this number of instances and users, of course you can make a weird-looking slide that actually looks like it's going to provide some kind of harmony. But at the biggest level, we're falling over on this in a lot of ways. Hit that button a little quicker than I hoped to. All right, so you need to be asking the question, is that how do users migrate to and from our systems? And that Atlassian ecosystem has a lot of competitors, a lot of apps that are competing for the same space that might do the same thing. And I don't think it's a bad thing that we enable customers to go from one competitor to another. You think that may be counterintuitive, or that you may be helping someone eat your own lunch, but think about how their trial, how a trial and error goes with how they're demoing these products to their bosses. That they may not be completely bought in yet. They may be on a month-to-month subscription, and they're just giving you a trial. So it makes sense for you to make their lives as easy as possible, no matter what they want to accomplish, even if that's not with you. And the reason why that's important is because the nature of our ecosystem. Things change so frequently that this month they might be with you, and next month they go to your competitor. But there's nothing that's going to stop them from coming back to you in a month's time when you prove that you're better than them on whatever feature that's important. So don't think that you're done once you've got them into your system. It's just as important that you can make the experience as fluid as possible. And it's not always about writing code. It's not always about delivering features. It could just be a piece of documentation or a change in some phrasing that you use to be aligned with an industry standard instead of creating the wheel from scratch. Another customer story that I harvested from my community post that gave me immense pleasure. So this is Brian Hill. He's the co-founder of Assemblyant. I've only read it, so I hope I'm pronouncing it right. And they handle the big customers. They handle the sticky problems, and Brian's been around the block. He's an experienced digital strategist and a health professional working out of New South Wales. He tends to specialize in the healthcare industry. So a lot of the problems that Brian works on are problems that we don't even know exist in the software world, with all kinds of regulations you have to adhere to and data policies that GDPR doesn't even touch yet. Brian has had to solve some problems that I could not even begin to understand what the heck he was talking about in some instances. But one story that Brian told me I thought was particularly interesting. I'll let you read that in detail, but essentially what he enabled a customer to do I think he told me 10 years ago when I actually talked to him about it, was to build a completely custom UI for their Jira instance. And this was back in, I think he said pre-5 days or something along those lines. And it was an incredible story of trying to solve a problem and trying not to get in the customer's way. But all what that looked like was building a custom UI on top of not millions, but thousands of custom fields that they had no interest in changing ever. This is a really weird use case for using Jira. I've never heard of anybody wanting to build a complete custom UI on top of it. And Brian didn't seem to think that was that crazy, actually. You can tell by the all caps in my response that I was blown away by this. And we sent some email correspondence, and Brian actually told me about several other stories that were much more detailed that were even crazier than this. So you have to ask, what else are people using alongside your systems? If you have a target use case, a very specific and narrow use case for your app or for your service, that's great, but what else are they using beside it? What else are they doing in addition to that? What other kind of regulations do they have to adhere to? Atlassian is venturing on brand new territory every day with targeting non-tech teams and business teams and healthcare and academia, you name it, defense. So a lot of us in the room haven't come from those backgrounds. So we need to ask our users, or at least ask, what do we think about our users? Sometimes if you don't have opportunity to talk to 2,000 people with an email blast. But in any case, you should be taking notes. You should figure out at Summit, at Keynote, or at Atlas camps that the weird things that we're pointing out here, they're much more common than we probably give attention to. And you should be taking note of them, because I think they'll prove valuable later on down the road. And just as importantly, I think Brian's story always conjures up is, should we have told him not to do that? Should we have said, hey, that's a terrible, terrible idea, and you're going to crash and burn? Because I suspect that Premier Support might have strongly suggested he do otherwise, because we know our limitations. But back then, we weren't real good about talking about them. And a lot of times, because our ecosystem is still kind of new, it's a bit fresh, and our startup mentality doesn't always require us to produce comprehensive documentation. Thank you, Agile methodology. So you have to make sure that customers are aware what you intend them to use it for. That starts with your marketplace listings. That starts with your documentation. And just as importantly is your marketing materials. Make sure that your marketing team is setting you up for success so that customers aren't expecting that you can save the world with whatever thing that you've provided them. This is the entire content strategy. It's an information experience that you should be paying attention to, that a lot of the smaller teams, they might not have a staff technical writer. They might not have a UX designer or a UX researcher. So these are the kinds of questions that they would ask if you did have these people on your staff. So you can make this kind of stuff happen on your own. And just as importantly, and I've been harping on this but haven't said the word, our customer base is increasingly diverse. And this is probably my favorite story because it's about me, but the diversity of Atlassian administrators is only going to get greater. It started with mostly IT system administrators, people who can play with hardware and who can do pretty much anything under the sun with software and can script things. But then you have people like me who never were intending to be an Atlassian administrator, someone who probably had no experience playing with Atlassian tools in the first place. And at the interview on which I was given admin credentials, they said, do you have a recommendation for project management software? I said, I absolutely do. That Jira thing, it's the bee's knees. You should totally get that. So on my first day after I accepted the offer, he said, hey, we bought Jira, now what? I said, well, I'm the technical writer. I'm not an administrator. I don't understand what you... Give me the administrative credentials. I'll go read the documentation. Right? Good old tech writer is going to always depend on the documentation to get him out of a jam. But after the first month, I started to realize that this thing is powerful, and I don't understand it all. So I read everything I could. I sat with a dev manager on a day-by-day basis, and we designed some of the most complex workflows I thought existed until in my Atlassian post. My community post proved me wrong instantly. We initially designed a 22-stage workflow that had all kinds of checks and balances about checking things into SVN, making sure you had the right Jira issue number, and really what that was about, it was a trust issue. The team that we were outsourcing work to, we didn't trust them to do the job they said they were going to do, and so we were relying on Jira to do the heavy lifting, where what we should have did was be upfront with our expectations. Because all it did was create this bottleneck that was me, that I ended up having to unblock developers on a regular basis. It's a very weird phone call for the dev manager to call the technical writer every single day to have to unblock a developer from doing something, and they're only blocked because they're not doing things the way that they were described. They're not doing the way they were prescribed by that manager's manager. It put me in a very awkward position, and I can guarantee you that it's not one of the things that when Jira was being designed that it was planned for, this kind of conflict of interest, this kind of give and take, this push and pull, at least not at the time. So the good thing about this experience is that I enjoyed it. I found what I thought was my calling, and I still kind of think it is. I'm not an Atlassian administrator anymore, but I work for Atlassian, and I'm very grateful for it. That experience taught me that I can do anything, and that Atlassian will be there for me. It gave me the confidence to apply for a job with Atlassian and move to Australia, move my wife and 3 children across the world from Orlando, Florida to Australia, because I could teach myself how to be an admin. That's a wonderful experience, and it helped me grow as a professional. So it wasn't long before I submitted my 2-week notice, and I handed it over to this young fellow right here, a guy by the name of Matt. He was Matt the intern when I first met him, and because there was no one else helping me with Atlassian tools, this kid who was at college to be a network administrator it was just as confident as I was that we had no idea what we were doing, but we'll figure it out together. But when I left, I handed the reins to Matt. He graduated from school and was well prepared to take on the role. So I think that what happened here is that Atlassian's investment in a great user experience paid dividends several times over for me, because we made the admin experience very slick. We made the UI logical. It matched up the documentation, and when I needed help, I knew where to go. I even taught myself how to use the API, use the Confluence API to solve some problems that my boss wouldn't give me budget for to buy apps that already did it. Again, technical writer, English degree. It's a testament to the quality of Atlassian's documentation that I was able to get this sorted. So you have to ask, are you providing the same kind of support for your customers? Could they do something weird? Could someone with no experience pick it up and run with it? And if not, why? What's stopping you? What could be possibly getting in your way? And I think part of what Atlassian did really well is they identified that there are people behind the decisions that are being made, that your users are actual human beings. And anyone who's been familiar with the Atlassian design system has seen persona cards before. And they're immensely useful. And we use them on a regular basis during design sparring, project kickoffs, planning, grooming, you name it. If there's a problem and there's a conflict and 2 people on the same team can't agree, we bring out persona cards. Because would Jose be able to figure this out? Because Jose might not be your typical admin, but Jose is absolutely a crucial step in the process of you getting paid by the customers who are using Atlassian products. Because if Jose doesn't understand how to use your app or your add-on, he's going to go find something else to do, something else that's a little bit more approachable. And it might even be more money. Again, so persona cards can be matched with what we call role cards. And all that does is identify what a person might do and what their expectations are. So it's a 2-faced card. On the front, it has the identification of what it is and a little icon. On the back, it has some questions that you might ask or some things that to think about. And they're always represented by data, by actual things that happen or really strong gut feelings, assumptions that we can make. And they're flexible and extensible, and they're actually kind of fun. I brought them home to my kids, and they thought they were cool. But then we got a little bit more granular. Once I started with Atlassian, we started creating even more granular that they're not role cards anymore, because we realized that one admin does not wear the same size shoes across all the different companies. So you had to figure out what each admin does and what their responsibilities are. I could have easily been identified as a moonlighter admin. It's because my goals are not easy to define. I didn't have any formal training. It was not my primary responsibility, although it did become that way. And my requirements were ridiculously complex, and I didn't even know what they were some of the times. And interestingly enough, the user researchers at Atlassian were able to identify all my requirements. And this is after the fact, so it was a very fun exercise to describe all the problems I had to a researcher, and then for them to prescribe what the diagnosis is, and that I was just not getting the support that I needed, although Atlassian was doing a really good job of filling in the gaps. So again, typical moonlighter admin is just squeezing things in. Are you planning for these people? Because most people, when you think of an admin, you think of someone who's a system administrator, or maybe even a project admin. Are you planning for the person who's only doing it as their part-time job? That was just several different admin support cards. I think most of the stuff you can get online at our design website, and if not, if you can email me or ping me later, I'd be happy to share them. Everything I'm talking about begs to ask the question, how do you support your users? Is it enough? And how do you know? Again, measuring your debt of empathy. If you know that you're doing a good job, then that's fine. You can continue doing what you're doing. But if you don't know what you don't know, then you're asking for a bad time. And just as digging through my archives for evidence of this epic workflow, I decided to ping Matt and see what he was up to. So I pinged Matt on Facebook. I said, yo, Matt, you still using the Atlassian instances that I started? Looking for a little ego padding. And of course he replies that a lot of the work was carried over. But afterwards, he said, we still have it around. This guy is very diligent. This is 4 years ago. He still keeps a copy of it around just to kind of, for show and tell, to tell people how far that he's come. I'm obviously a little bit excited by this, by the oh my God, yes. So while in the middle of his workday, he decided to go grab that for me. And I don't think it's that bad, actually, when I was looking at it. It looked quite nice. Now, Matt didn't seem to think so, because he says it looks like a circuit board and that you need a computer engineering degree to read it. Now, I think that's a bit harsh, Matt, but it seems like we did a pretty good job at the time. So again, what I'm talking about here is a real world scale. And it's not something I'm prescribing to you. It's something that every company should be building on their own. You should have a spectrum of where your customers sit. It's not, you don't just have one customer. You don't just have one persona that you're working towards, that you're building to. So find out what matters to your customers, put it on a scale, figure out how you can measure it. Or at least have a conversation about it and say, this is what we'd like to do when we get to the big time and we have the kind of resources where we can really dig into how to give what our users need. Remember, Atlassian ecosystem, this is particularly important because people expect our tools to be versatile. They expect them to be able to bend and mold at what they need to for any specific use case. And the organic adoption strategy means that our tools are going to pop up all over the place, and you got to plan for that. So figure out how they're using it, how they're getting their hands on it, and how you can better make that transition easy. And then also don't forget that our customer base is getting increasingly diverse. Stop making assumptions about who's using your product and just actually talk to them. There's lots of ways you can do it, and I'm making it sound much easier than it actually is, but really just talk to them because you'll realize that they're much different than you probably expect. Or at least you might make some interesting friends. But of course, size still matters. Figuring out how you can get them to as big as possible, as fast as possible, with as little resistance is always going to be important, especially for this really high growth field. But scaling isn't just about how big can it get. It's about, does it fit? And does it fit now? And will it fit later? It's not just about how big something is. It's about how well it does the job. So now what? I'm not asking you to do anything different. Just asking you to remember some of the weird stories. Ask people around you for the weird stories. I find that there's never a shortage of them amongst the Atlassian crew. And make your own real-world scale. I'd be really interested to see what you come up with because you'd be really surprised that when you measure your own empathy, remember, you're not measuring what your customer is doing, just measuring how well are you measuring your customers. Sounds very meta, but I promise it makes sense when you do it. You'll be very surprised that you could probably be doing a little bit more, even with a very shoestring budget. It doesn't cost a lot to send an email. And when in doubt, Atlassian always has your back. And as my colleague Lucy hinted at earlier, the Atlassian team playbook is full of wonderful things. Customer interviews, super simple. Super simple. And online, we have a bunch of email templates about kind of questions you should ask. There's no excuse. If you don't talk to your customers, you won't understand them. They'll give you money, but you won't understand why. And then again, sparring. I won't go through that. Hopefully everyone here got to see Lucy's talk before about sparring because it's fantastic. It's just an opportunity for anyone, really, to give you feedback on what you're working on. There's rules in place, of course. You want to set the context, make sure they understand, but it's an opportunity for people to voice what's on their mind about what you're working on without negative ramifications. And then journey mapping is always a fun exercise. Is to put yourself in your customer's shoes for once. Click the actual buttons you expect them to, and take screenshots. Oh crap! I hit the backward button. Oh, there we go. And there's plenty more plays where that came from on the Atlassian playbook. I've even set up a Go link so you can get straight to them. If you feel like you might have a problem understanding your customers and you want to solve your empathy debt problem, give it a shot. You can't do much worse than some free templates and a lot of guidance. And just a little bit of empathy goes a long way. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that interesting talk, John.
My pleasure.
So I think it's time for everybody to start finding those stories, and the perfect place to do that is outside during our happy hour. Enjoy it. And I'll see you tomorrow.